but it's true. I ran into Lloyd Blankfein, who said the other day, 2 days ago, and he's the man from Goldman Sachs, the head of it, who said that, Goldman Sachs was doing God's work. So I said, it cost him quite a lot of PR, as you know. And so I said, if I was your PR person, I would have said that you really had the Indian mythology in mind, that because in Indian mythology there are three gods, one who creates, another one who sustains, and the third who destroys. And I would have said, you really had the third one in mind. So, but certainly Silicon Valley and throughout the system in all kinds of occupations, skilled occupations, we have been trying to bring in H-1Bs, but there's a continuous fight over it because of, and I think there's one point you need to make, and which is that there's a huge variety of abilities and skills, even if you're teaching in a classroom. I'll come to the online thing in a moment, but in the classroom, there's always 30%, no matter whom you've admitted or which university you're teaching at, who really shouldn't have been there. So there's always a tail of about 30%, which you have to call up your friends and desperately ask them to employ these guys, because they're not really the kind of people at the very top 30%. So when people hear like Bill Gates and Intel and so on, they want more and more H-1Bs. They really have in mind superbly talented, trained people from outside. And then you have the opposition from the bottom 30% who say, but because these guys are coming in, we don't get the jobs, right? But the point is those guys are not they're not really substitutes for us. We have to find jobs for them somewhere else, but they're not the substitutes for this. And so this is the kind of fight we carry on all the time, but it's just a matter of the politics of it. But basically this system is into attracting skills, and people just come in a very free. So that is one thing. The second thing so the policy is in fact, while it is not fully oriented to a skill formation like many other countries are beginning to do, we are still nonetheless a relatively open society, and people do manage to come in. I've actually suggested about 15 years ago in the New York Times that you take 50, maybe 100 top the reasonable universities in this country, and in all the physical sciences, engineering, even economics, which economics is a subject which today you can't read in bed. You have to sit at a desk, unfortunately, and really work at it like in mathematics or something. So there, just automatically let people stay on instead of going through the hassle, going back and coming back again and so on. And that's actually now something which they're beginning to do. But now let me come to trade now, trade openness. And that also has been affected actually, because the role of technology in trade, in terms of distribution of income, has become a big issue in this country. So the ability to keep open markets has become increasingly difficult in this because of the income distribution issue. Many workers think that because they're trading and with us in the developing, putting on my Indian hat, then that is depressing their wages. So trade with poor countries, all the developing countries included, is creating poor in the rich countries. I mean, that's the fear. And then President Obama, is completely paralyzed as a result because his constituencies include the unions. So, and one of the problems is that President Clinton, who could have argued with them and converted them, instead he fought with them and vanquished them, and now they're important from the last election, and President Obama is sort of stuck with this very hostile attitude to trade, and he's not able to move at all on the trade issue. But here there's a different narrative, which is that this is where I'll just mention technology and then move on to the better technology, which is the online. The two narratives. One is that it's a trade with poor countries that is depressing the wages of the workers here. The other is, no, in fact, trade with the poor countries is actually helping the poor. Why? Because technological change is going on continuously. And that narrative then says that because this is unskilled labor saving, meaning every technological change is displacing unskilled labor. And that is what is putting the pressure on wages. And mind you, I'm not talking about unemployment, which is a macro phenomenon, and that's a different story. But this is our pressure on wages. And that is, therefore, continuously you're displacing people. So if you go and, I mean, if you take a child, your child or your grandchild, to see Modern Times, I guess you've all seen Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times, where he goes berserk on the assembly line, if you remember. And and your grandchild says, take me to see an assembly line. Try and find one today. You can't. There are assembly lines, but there are no Charlie Chaplins on them. There are no people. And you've got 5 or 6 guys at the top in a little window who are managing the whole thing. So there's demand for those skilled people and no demand for the unskilled. I mean, this is a stylized argument, but it's very definitely true. That being the case, that's what's putting the pressure on them. Now, what has happened, therefore, is, so what one can argue is that the wages of the workers are not going to be influenced by the competition with the labor-intensive products, because we've already moved out of all that into assembly, these kinds of automation. But whatever we earn, we will be able to buy more if the imported goods are cheaper, labor-intensive goods. So if you go and look at the budgets of the workers, they are, in fact, heavily, as you would expect, on flip-flops and, cheap jeans, and, the women over there don't go and buy lingerie at Victoria's Secret, which I say is no more because she's revealed it all. But, I mean, you go to Filene's Basement, Macy's, where you get cheap lingerie and so on. So that is, in fact, so if those goods become a little cheaper because of international trade, that actually helps you improve your real wages rather than depress them. So there's a big, issue here. And I think that so technology, in a way, is creating the problem, but it's also one which is also helping, the trade is helping you. So this is a plug for globalization, keeping your trade open. I mean, it's just a mistake to think trade. But now let me come to online, and then we can have some discussion. Because clearly, openness in immigration, in trade, etc., is helpful to us here. And particularly immigration of skilled people is going to be very helpful. We should not really try and turn it down. All of this is a good thing, and in developing countries it's a good thing. But how do we then address the online thing? So that's where I want to link it up. I've just made a little case for policies which are open on a variety of dimensions and how it's important for development. Now, when it comes to developing countries, clearly online enables you immediately to access people. They can't afford to have people like us, from in developed countries, well-known professors and so on, to go and, get them to come and, finance their salaries and so on. Singapore maybe can and does, but large numbers of countries can't afford that. It's too expensive. Online means, if Columbia gets me to, in fact, they're increasingly doing it, lots of universities are doing it, if they get you to record something and then have long-distance access to it, that immediately opens up the possibility that you're going to be able to get access to the best lectures in the world. All right? You don't have to come here or send people here, which is far more expensive, and it can never be that widespread. So if you can organize it in such a way that, in fact, you're able to use the talent in this part of the world, send it out, make it accessible to people where the people want to build up skills, so that without attending MIT, they can get MIT-style education. That is really the important thing, which is the promise of this. Now, MIT actually, I was at MIT for 12 years, they actually have these, if you Google it down, there are actually very good lectures, but that's like a textbook, all right? Supply and demand, and it's very nicely explained, almost as if I was doing it 12 years, many years ago. But there's nothing interactive or anything like that. It's not even animated. So you're not able to really earn the full power, like the one which was being described by you, where people get together to professors and so on. But here it is just a first step in that direction. So if people in India, China, Singapore, etc., can access this kind of education, and in my judgment, and in a moment I'll be talking about how we do it around here, and how we can do it around here. But this I'm talking of doing it for the developing countries. That is going to be a major breakthrough, because there's just no way you can bring education up to snuff that fast over there. And there are lots of people, like, for instance, people worry a lot about competition from India because of the outsourcing. You must have heard that, that people in the United States in particular are worried that jobs will be outsourced. Everything will be done in Bangalore or in Hyderabad or somewhere. And point is, it's just simply not true. They think of India as a gigantic country. It is a gigantic country in terms of space, in terms of people. But if you look at the number of people who can do outsourcing jobs and answer your phone calls and so on from here, about how to fix your Dell and so on, that's much smaller, because the age group which can go to education in the college, only 8 to 9% of that age group actually goes to college. Of that, the number of people who do study in English is another tiny fraction. Of that, the number of people who can actually speak English, which you can understand, is even smaller. By the time you multiply all these small fractions together, you're down to a very small number, right? But it scares the pants off the Americans who worry about it. We're going to have to compete with this. They talk about China also in the same way, but about how they're producing so many engineers and so on. But the quality of the engineers is something else again. And a lot of my Chinese friends say, they're fine for fixing bridges and, repairing something or something. But they're not going to be hot shots competing with our people in Intel and so on and so forth. So there's a whole lot of that going on. So one thing we have to worry about as we improve access to our education by Chinese and Indians, and maybe and a few others, but China and India is very much on the minds of people in the West, because they're such big countries and big exporters. We have to be able to see whether we can actually sustain this, because you would then have Senator Grassley and all sorts of people saying, don't do it because you're encouraging competitors, right? So that's going to hurt us. Now that's where I would just like to make one point and then move to the internal side of the US, as to how it can help improve US education, okay? But there, so I'm just saying that one problem which we have is, and this is something continuously coming up, it came up in the last primary election where Hillary Clinton actually was embracing the wrong point of view. She was a protectionist at that time, and it's kind of interesting, just an aside, which is that while she's using USAID to do a whole lot of microfinance and Gates Foundation sort of issues at the level of internal education and things like that. The one big thing which can actually help the developing countries, which is trade, where literally hundreds of millions of people have actually profited, she's silent. So, if you want Grameen Bank or something, then they're doing it. But that microfinance by definition is micro. So a whole lot of micros still don't add up to a macro, right? So I'm not saying don't do it, but there's a disconnect here between openness to help foreign countries and handing out goodies from the USAID, which probably creates more dependence more than anything else, whereas trade opens up jobs and so on. I had to just have that dig at her because I think that's the problem with our system. But this protectionism is very much a problem, and people are going to come and say, Dr. Davis, why are you sending out, why are you training all these guys who are going to compete with us?